Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Discriminating Gamer. Say, would you help me look for new pussycat?
What's a new pussycat?
Whoa! Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at Fighters of the Pacific from Don't Panic Games and distributed through Ares Games. We'll get back to the review in just a moment. I want to take a minute to ask you to check out my other channel, that is Cody Carlson PhD, where we talk about history, books on history, military history. I even post some of my lectures for my classes on there. Please check that out. Please subscribe to that channel. And now, back to the review. In Fighters of the Pacific from Don't Panic Games and distributed through Ares Games, 1 to 2 players take on the roles of either the American naval aviators or the Japanese naval aviators as they battle for dominance in the Pacific in World War II. Now, players can play in various scenarios of this game. You have kind of interlocking puzzle boards that can make giant boards depending on the scenario you're playing. And then you're going to go ahead and collect your airplanes, the type of aircraft you're going to be using in this game. There are 3 different types of aircraft for both sides: fighters, kind of dive bombers, torpedo bombers, etc. You're going to go ahead, collect those, and then you're going to go ahead and set up the instructions for the specific scenario you're going to play. Now, at the beginning of each scenario, the initiative will be assigned for that scenario, for that first turn. Thereafter, for every turn, you're going to go ahead and figure out what your initiative is. Now, your initiative is really based on your air groups. Now, how air groups work in this game is every single group of fighters that are connected on these hex boards that are directly adjacent to each other, that are at the same elevation and facing the same direction, are considered an air group. If ever one's connected but it's facing a different direction, those are 2 different air groups. If one's facing the same direction but it is flipped over so that it's blue instead of white, there are different elevations, that's 2 different air groups. And of course, any that are just out on their own, even if it's just one plane by himself, is considered an air group. You're going to add up how many air groups you have. Who's ever got kind of the fewest, they're going to get initiative. And what initiative means is they can choose if they're going to go first or the enemy is going to go first that round. Now, on your turn, you're going to select one of your air groups, and it can move. Now, every plane has a movement speed. Usually it's around 3. And you have to move your full speed every time. Now, you can break up the air groups, but every plane from that initial air group will go. Once it's completed its turn, you'll place a marker on it to show that it has gone for that turn. But planes can move in different ways. They can move forward 1 space for 1 point, so they can move forward 3 spaces. You can move forward and then turn so that you're facing the next over hex grid anywhere along that path. And you can keep turning in that direction, but you cannot make a right turn and then make a left turn and vice versa on a single turn. Now, you can also slide. Instead of moving to the hex directly in front of you, you can move to the adjacent hex, either one of the adjacent hexes that's directly in front of you, but you have to keep in the same direction. Now, for a free action, you can dive. That is to say, if you're high altitude with a white background, you can move forward 1 space and flip over to a lower background, and then you still have your 3 other movement points to do. Now, you can also climb. If you're at low altitude, you can move forward 1 space, flip over to the white side, but that takes 2 of your movement points. Now, all your planes with fighter traits can also do an S-split maneuver. Essentially, if you've got a plane in white, you can flip it to blue and turn it facing any direction in one of any of the hex squares around its initial movement space, and that takes all of its movement points. Now, as you're moving, what you're attempting to do is move into a position where you can fire upon the enemy. So you move into a position that is within your firing arc. Now, you have a little sheet that has kind of your 3 different planes, and it shows all this information, including their firing arcs. So you want to get a plane in your firing arc. Now, if that plane is in your firing arc, and you can only pick one even if there's multiples, if that plane is in your firing arc, you can fire at it. In fact, you automatically fire at it. It just happens. You fire at that plane in your firing arc. Now, the plane that's in your firing arc, if it has already moved, it's going to take damage or be destroyed. But if it has not yet moved, then the other player out of sequence can go ahead and move it its full range, but that is its activation movement. It won't activate normally with the rest of its air group. So the combat here is deterministic. Essentially, you point your plane toward an enemy plane, and you are going to fire on it, but that plane then can maneuver. Now, there's also some other bells and whistles. For instance, some of the American planes, they've got armor. They've got an armor rating that is heavier than the Japanese 0. You've also got, like the Japanese 0, for instance, if it maneuvers to a space right in front of it, it gets to fire twice, so it could potentially take down some of those more heavily armored American planes if it's in the right space at the right time. Now, if a plane is hit that has a 2 armor rating, essentially you put kind of this like fire and billowy smoke beneath it to illustrate that it's been hit once. It behaves normally unless it gets hit again, in which case it is out of the game. Now, when a plane does move, it gets out of the way of the plane's firing at it, that's called a dodge. Now, when you dodge with the plane, you get out of a firing arc, you move into a place where that plane now has a firing arc on one of your planes, you can then move that plane, and it can cause a chain reaction here. Now, in some scenarios, there are naval vessels. There's also islands. You can attack the naval vessels, some of your dive bombers or torpedo bombers. There is anti-aircraft. They can send up barrages. So there's all sorts of battles that go on that way. Now, at the end of the round, once everybody is gone, you go ahead, you can move ships. If you have any torpedoes in the water, they move. You can go ahead and collect all of your activation markers. If there's reinforcements that are scheduled to come in, they come in at that time. And then you go ahead, you check for victory. If no one's won yet, you begin another round of the game. So usually these games are on a turn track. There are conditions where you can win before the turn track is exhausted. If you eliminate all the enemy's aircraft, then of course you win. But if you meet other specific scenario objectives and you do that first, then you win. Fighters of the Pacific. So Fighters of the Pacific is a very, very, very light war game, and that is awesome. Just because it's light, that's not to say it's rules heavy, doesn't mean that there isn't real strategic depth here, and there isn't real consideration of what you're doing. You're trying to maneuver these aircraft to get them into position to fire, but it's not as easy as you might think, because of course, you know, if you're moving first, you can maneuver to a position to hit someone else, but then they can dodge, and that can cause all sorts of problems. You never know how it's going to play out. So it's a really interesting game, and it's a really interesting system that they've created here. I think this is probably, I don't know that I've ever played a game quite like it. That is to say, one that is this light, but offers this much strategic depth with this kind of mechanic and this kind of a theme. It does remind me of a few other games, come to think of it. There's a hint of Star Wars X-Wing here, or maybe Wings of Glory with kind of initiative and movement. Certainly that's there. But with the grid-based system, it kind of reminds me too of Leviathans, which came out a while ago, although that was dealing with like these kind of heavier-than-air battleships, and this is, of course, fighters. But still, it's reminiscent of that. And yet, again, as I say, this one is entirely its own game. I've never played anything quite like it before. It's fun. It is interesting. There's a solo mode I haven't played with. I've just played the 2-player game. Kim and I played this game. And it is really, really fun. We both got a huge kick out of it. It's got a great theme. The artwork here is fantastic. And it's fun. It's complex. It's depth. And at times it almost feels a little abstract, almost like a chess match or something, where you're trying to maneuver these planes into position. But still, great fun. Really enjoyed Fighters over the Pacific. And I heartily recommend it. Recommendation for Fighters of the Pacific is buy it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us today on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment for us on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We'd ask you to please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. I'd ask you also, ladies and gentlemen, to please check out my other channel. That is Cody Carlson, PhD, where we talk about military history, books on history. I'm posting some of my lectures on World War II on that channel, Cody Carlson, PhD. Please subscribe to that channel. It would mean a lot to me. Please leave a thumb to this video on Board Game Geek. And if you like this video and you like the channel, I'd ask you to please click on the Super Thanks button on this channel, and please leave a contribution if that's something you'd like to do. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I've really been thinking about it lately. I don't know whether or not to build my own mattress. I'll just have to sleep on it.
Please somebody help me on my feet again. And I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I'll be dying. Once a year I wind up in the band.
Players take on the roles of either Japanese naval aviators or American naval aviators.